Hello. I would like to share with you today some thoughts about this C minor Mozart Fantaisie. It has such a staggering opening and the same closing at the end. Scattered fragments, almost as if of life hopes, thrown in an ocean of disbelief, and the opening questioning the abyssal question that we all ask ourselves in the depth of our own consciousness: what, where, why, who. And to ask such kind of interrupted silence, unharmonized melodic pattern of dropping chromatic note and distant echo, and dropping even more the question chromatically. Century we've heard since Romanticism, Modernism, Postmodernism, Atonalism, Serialism, all the dissonances live freely, happily, and in a way unrelated to their dissonance being compared to a consonance, because that's no more tonality. And as the whole tone scale of Debussy, and there is the octotonic, and Messiaen, and Schoenberg, and Boulez, and. Meanwhile, you have also Prokofiev, Rachmaninoff, who remained more classical, like Fauré, in their modernity, of at least their expression of what they needed to express in modernity. Nobody's forced to be modern or to express some sense of modernity. I think that at the close to the end of the short life, Mozart felt the need to express through this unusual piece for its time period, because after all, it's not a museum artifact that we're revisiting. When we play this music, it's now, it's the present, it's not watching something of the past. Audacity, the driven, pure intensity, not just mood setting, but really deeply questioning philosophically ourselves. Of course, in my little life, which has no relevance compared to the greatness of this masterpiece in time periods and forever to be, I was as a child a student of Mademoiselle Boulanger, who was making me discover these chromaticisms, these modulations, these droppings, this coloristic usage of these effects. Not that she said it so, because she used to say whatever the music expresses for us is a sense of tenderness, perhaps prettiness, which are other of the different fragments that come in this fantasy of uninterrupted interruptions, in fact. It's uninterrupted interruptions. You feel like no solace, no consolation, even a drive can be performed more or less. It is a fury, this kind of essential moment. It is now, it have to be done. It cannot wait. I have to express this. I find this fantastic, because in Romantic era, a century, and not even 30 years later, when Beethoven writes his last sonata, or earlier, his Fifth Symphony, we know we are in the Romantic era that will be developed until Brahms, who will be looking at Beethoven. Inside you have Schumann, Liszt, Mendelssohn, and Chopin, Schubert. Just naming those planets, it's like ecosystems of their own, all sharing the tonal system, the tension, the release, but not totally the same way. The Sturm und Drang and the Sprachgesang and Weber and operatic music and Italianate opera and then Germanic opera and then the French opera and then the realistic expression of the Italian opera with the verismo. The human nature expresses itself breaking the rules of the formality, the mood, the presentation, they're not gratuitous niceness, not more than their virtuosity, Mozart style. In a sense, imitating on the piano the vocalise of what is the bel canto, and then anticlimatically dropping to a little pleasant, apparently nothing compared to which is unimportant compared to the dimensions of all this masterpiece and its implications and its meanings and what we connect to it and how and what and where and all. I find that for my little life, therefore, I must say, it's Mademoiselle Boulanger making me discover this piece like many others. Not spoon-feeding me the meaning of it, telling me words, adjectives, which I could or not understand in my early childhood. Pointlessly, she used to say, but you know, it's the music itself that speaks what it is, even if it's an expression of tenderness or expression perhaps of a revolt. And it's true. Describing it is like interpretation. Do I overstate it? Do I understate it? Do I just state it? What is just? What is right? To be or not to be? To be or not to be? It depends of the context, of the style, of the expectation, perhaps of the artistic director, of the stage manager, of the teacher, of how you want to say it. Of course, when you perform it, you go from bridge to the coda of the same Fantaisie by Mozart before Beethoven wrote in the same series. Regardless the connections, I don't want to enter into this echo or inspiration or imitation or quotation, or perhaps it's just common musical time period in which we're no more. That's what I think it's difficult for us to establish as performers, or me as a teacher for students, or me as a performer, to not overstate the effects of the dynamics. Of course, the modern piano can do more forte and more piano in each of the both of the two endings. But that doesn't mean that I make it more meaningful. Does it mean that I don't overstate it compared to what it wanted to state? Or how the psyche of people who received it could filter it. I mean, the dissonances of yesterday are the consonances of tomorrow. Mademoiselle Boulanger said that. I read it in a conference in 1925 in Rice University about modernism in French music, comparing Debussy's audacities and Stravinsky's revolutionary language of musical idiom, obviously, since language and idiom is the same. And then Fauré, who was very classical for his time, and already still is, and his modernism didn't need to clash in a certain dissonance way. I mean, it's what it necessarily needs. I mean, Beethoven needed to break the sonata form, Mozart not. or the tonal system further than Mozart receiving from Haydn, the spiritual son of Haydn. Beethoven was really the spiritual betrayer of Haydn, but he had to break, to rebuild, to establish what in fact blossoms into Romanticism. And then the mantle, I mean, I cannot find the right words because they escape me. But I would say there is a continuum that leads all the way, in at least Germany, to Brahms dying in 1897, which is only 106 years after Mozart. But so much has happened in between. Of course, people lived shorter, but that's not only that. I think it's also because some composers like Mendelssohn and some composers like Schubert didn't need to question the tonal system or the form. They just expressed their melodic geyser of goodness, of musical expression, of emotion that touches us today, not as an old piece, just as a piece of today while we play the music of then. But if we think how it was perceived, played, meant, understood, suggested in the time, wow, it must have been mind-boggling rather than only shocking. It might have been leaving the listener in disarray when you didn't just start a piece, well, not like this because he didn't do, that was too much, excuse me. These empty octaves already by themselves are striking enough. I don't need to start with a dissonance. And then the fact that we have heard music after taints a little bit the weirdness, striking drive of what it was then. The more I age, since I played since childhood, the more I find that every time I play these expressions, these meanings, these are they call scattered fragments. Opening and closing. They question me with the same freshness, with the same new novelty. You could say an actor learns how to die on stage every day for the play's needs, be believable, and therefore for the audience to believe in the storytelling, because then the art is the inevitable form of life through fiction. But it has to be through the actor believable, so through the performer and the piano also. I restate that story that I know, but in a way it unveils itself to me, reveals itself to me every time anew. And the rest, the breath, the chromaticism, and if the recapitulation. And how much Mozart chose in this fragmentation to choose how much of each ingredient. So it appears spontaneous, but it appears also thoughtful, but it appears at the same time without concessions for formality, niceness, and mood setting only. Mozart died in 1791, and I find that this music remains disturbingly beautiful in that sense of not aesthetically cute, that's for sure. If anything, this fantasy is not cute. Perhaps there is a necessity for superficial happiness, as if putting your mind away from this existential question of the opening. more, it's a temptation to overstate the moods and to make it over cute and overall. How to find the right balance compared to what it meant then and for then, now compared to then, and now compared to what we've heard since then. But it's difficult to isolate ourselves entirely in our psyche from what we have heard happen since. It's like everything our psychology is different because we are used to some things that compared to then are so fast in transport, in psychological provocation from images, how do we react, how our psyche even, how somebody from the 18th century might find somebody from the 21st century crazy in terms of neurological situation. But within his time, for a Mozart to write this, and for people to listen to it, I cannot imagine how frightening this must have been. Beyond shocking and effective in terms of that. And he finishes with a scale. And in the middle he has this modulation between B minor and then D major. Common tone on the third. And Mademoiselle Boulanger would hold my hand and say, where is he going? And I would say D major, and she would say, but that you who play, you know it's okay, but we don't. We want to not know. We want to be surprised. And a repeated statement, and then all of a sudden in D major, not with the modulation, which he didn't say, but I assume that's why I'm giving it as an example. The explicit modulation is avoided because we are almost into this effect of early romanticism that Mozart perceives about, where the moods go from extreme to another, a roller coaster of emotional expression. Scriabin dwells on that in his expression. Mozart in the French way pronounced, he is more of what we think still galant, rococo, pretty, and in a way politely pleasant, and not dark and questioning. This is what we assume more with the blossoming of this romanticism with Beethoven, who really opens the door, and then Schumann, Schubert, of course, before Schumann, this Chopin, Brahms, Berlioz. That's why I don't think it's possible as a teacher, nor as a performer, nor as a musician, or even a thinker, a sharing person with you now, to compartment ourselves and say, I'm going to ignore what happened. I've never heard a dissonance unrelated, unresolved before, so that I can feel what it meant. Regardless, perhaps I'll never be able to express or bring you to feel what it might have meant to hear that kind of fragmented, abyssal interruption of short thoughts that lose us, literally. Charm us, but lose us. More lose us than charm us. And when he finishes with this gestural, almost glissando, of rising scales, Beethoven would do in his third concerto. How can I not think about it? How can I not think of what I do in Mozart? It doesn't mean that because I think of it that I am some kind of musical midget because I'm trying to connect dots that are not meant to be connected. It's just that when it was written and played and imagined and shared by Mozart, or with Mozart's time people, Beethoven's was writing still Mozartian style, Haydn of the earlier style. He had not yet become the Beethoven whom we grow to know as the Beethoven. The early, the late, So is it a precursor? Is it as if Mozart is calling for something and opening the door to something, saying, this might be where we go from here, to express ourselves raw, without only the formality of the politeness, if you want, or of the societal expectation of a facade. How are you? I'm fine, even if I'm not, but I say that because if not, we cannot live in society if everybody just starts like this. This, yes. But then that is also belittling and saying, oh, this is what we're going to think. Mozart is that, Beethoven is this, Chopin is that. No, they all have so much more. It's more subtle. It's more innuendo. They have different expressions. Sometimes in Haydn you already have what Mozart will develop, which Beethoven will explode, which then will just become it. And why didn't they develop it earlier? Why didn't they go for atonal earlier? Why didn't they question the dissonance-consonance rapport? They didn't need to. They survived by writing music. They had less time to think in terms of theoretizing the language and organizing the... But they did write treatises. They had a lot of time. They, meaning the driven ones, were, despite of all, which today we could consider they didn't have electricity, electronics, any tools to reach like I can with you through the new technologies of today. But they reach us even with their old technologies of the day. A little paper with few insignificant apparently signs, and all of a sudden this interrupted rests in the opening by questioning notes, and then unharmonized, and then interrupted answers, and then welcoming modulations that make us almost reassured and the hope, and then a driven moment of a fury of expression, and then the return of the opening statement devastatingly questioning us abyssally of who we are, where we are, what we are doing. And all this in a format of a solo keyboard piece, not a mass, not a requiem, not an opera. Well, he did, and Don Giovanni, and then we know he did. But in that form, succinct as it is, it's so much more strongly stabbing by its raw content that touches us immediately, and these modulations and harmonizations lose us. It's as if we get lost in our own thoughts of today, let less then. Ach, Wolfgang, mademoiselle. It keeps us humble in front of the abyss of the expression, of the, even of the shaping of it. Experience? Ha! Perhaps a little. But is it good for a young performer? It's not something you catch or you transmit like a flu. So, understanding, perhaps, but at which level and with what criteria for the student compared to the teacher? With what criteria do we funnel the understanding of it from the written text to the performing? And of course, for educated musicians and musicologists, they'll say that it's too much, not enough, not stylistic, not right. What is the time frame? What is the soundscape frame? Publishers, recordings. So many vectors from which we can perhaps learn something and find what we think it is. But with life, and that's what I think, by feeling itself afresh, it still becomes an old companion, and you feel like you find how to reach the end of the phrase. If you spread the tempo or not. If you use the legato and the pedal or just the finger legato or not. If you try to be surprised by the new harmony or not. And then unexpected inharmonic modulation, E flat minor, B major. In the F sharp minor slow movement of the A major concerto, he does the same. All of a sudden, like here, before Schubert, he already decides to coloristically harmonize these modulations, which are immediately pivotally on the opposite side, where you thought you were so far but you're so close. You're charmed and scared at the same time because it's so tempting to believe it, like life, and to hope it, and to get comfortable in it, as he'll do in the second pleasant element. Well, all of them are fragments, but you enter in that disbelievable belief, and you want to hope in it. You want to believe this is it. the joy, the happiness, the well-being, not the drama, not the abyss, not the sorrow, not the hope, not the hopelessness, which is at the beginning and at the end. The mystery beyond the drama that it vehicles in us. Without gloves, without polite smiles, just the raw fact. I insist very much on teaching, and when I perform it as well, to myself teaching every time, and never found yet, probably never will, what is the right balance of these human innuendos of expression, operatic, symphonic, instrumental, regardless, mass, symphony, perhaps, regardless, how much is too much, how much is not enough? How much is the music itself, the modulation itself? Does it all? Does it mean that I have to still do the contrast of the dynamics, of the articulation? How much is the right amount for the proper translation? Bring it alive, make it believable. And you can perhaps decide that it's too much for this style, not enough, but compared to what? Compared to the next style, which at that time hasn't yet come. That's the mystery of it, which I liked to have shared today with you. It's striking, like the questioning that the music itself does. And we, and it, and we, and it, and then reassuring. That mysteriously eerie reassurance. And how much this forzando on the door, stabbing, but stabbing operatically, stabbing fortepianistically, stabbing pianistically of today, delaying it with the bass, just together. It's so easy to want to go a little more of the affect, and it becomes a ballade by Chopin or by Liszt. La note juste, as Mademoiselle Boulanger used to search for the right note, to define its place. Mozart here is doing the right psychological innuendo affect. Right to him, right to his time period, outside of which we might find it lame or perhaps not dramatic enough, or why over-dramatize it? As if the audacity of it, the flabbergasting audacity of it is not enough for us, so we have to add to it more and make it the forte fortissimo, the piano pianissimo, the sforzando accentissimo, the ritenuto rubatissimo, Mozartissimo. Oh, thank you.